Hey guys, tonight we drift back not just in time, but through texture, through scent, through sweat-soaked sheets laid on camel caravans and palace floors. Your eyes adjust to the flicker of oil lamps as the desert breathes outside, hot and patient. The air thick with frankincense clings to your skin, sticky as a lover's whisper at midnight. Beneath your bare feet, packed earth and old secrets. Before you even know where you are, your hands are brushing aside a curtain of dyed silk, and you step into Babylon's oldest spice market, where nothing is just for sale, not really. Every sack of saffron and myrrh comes laced with stories. And tonight, they're whispering to you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is. I'm always curious who else is wide awake at this hour. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Uruk, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates cradle the bones of empires, and your nose is full of burning resin, musk, and dried roses. It smells like someone's about to make a mistake they'll remember for generations. A merchant leans in, his beard oiled, his breath spiced with fennel, and tells you the Queen of Sheba once passed through here. She left with a caravan of perfume and priests, and one particularly sulky Babylonian scribe who smelled like nutmeg and regret. That's the thing about the silk roads. They weren't really roads. They were veins. They pulsed with silk, yes, and salt and lapis lazuli. But more than anything, they pulsed with human hunger, lust, ambition, the deep need to be seen naked and not turned away. The kind of need you don't write in letters. You send it wrapped in silk, steeped in cinnamon oil, hidden beneath the false bottom of a cedar box dot. As the sun scorches the clay buildings around you, you catch sight of her, a woman leaning against a pillar, face veiled, fingers stained with saffron. She's selling perfume, but not with words. She lets the wind lift the scent from her scarf, and the men, they follow like bees. Sex here isn't a transaction. It's an economy. Frankincense burned on every altar to every god from Judea to Egypt, not just to sanctify, but to seduce. Lust was holy if properly perfumed. Historians still argue whether temple prostitution was literal or symbolic, but one thing's certain. The priestesses of Ishtar knew more about aroma than any chemist. Their recipes included crocodile dung for texture, wine lees for color, and bruised jasmine for the soul. And while the city scribes documented taxes and eclipses, lovers scribbled on broken pottery. Asterisk, I dreamt you kissed me with honey on your tongue. Asterisk, your fingers brush a basket of dried fenugreek as a storyteller in the corner begins his tale. He speaks of a concubine high-ranking, veiled in blue linen, who belonged to a king but loved his brother. Their rendezvous happened behind spice jars. He'd pretend to inspect the cardamom. She'd hand him a clove pod and, with it, a message. Asterisk, tonight, same place. The new girl's been bribed. Asterisk, but like all things in Babylon, desire came at a cost. When their affair was discovered, the brother was banished to a lemon grove in the east, and the concubine? She was sent to the perfumers, ironically. Her punishment, to create the scent for the king's next bride. And so she did, adding bitter orange and rue, a fragrance that made the new wife itch. Petty, perhaps? Legendary? Absolutely, even now. As you stroll deeper into the market, you can feel it. How desire moved alongside trade. How a single drop of oil could cost a camel or a promise. And in between the official caravans, there were always stowaways. Lovers, spies, exiles, poets who smelled like myrrh, and bad decisions. One scholar even suggested that certain trade routes existed because of romantic obsessions. A Persian noble once chased his runaway lover across Mesopotamia and ended up establishing a new merchant outpost just to have an excuse to stay nearby. Love as logistics, spice as pretext. It's not in the textbooks, but you know it's true. You can feel it in the way this place thrums. Quirky fact for the night. The earliest known recipe for lipstick comes from Babylon. It was made of crushed gemstones and lead. Yes, lead. So beautiful lips, sure, but also slight hallucinations. Which makes you wonder how many declarations of love back then were just mercury poisoning wearing a tunic. Either way, it adds a little shimmer to the story. You round the corner. The sky deepens into plum. A girl offers you a cube of dried mango dusted with chili. You bite, and it's sweet hot the way this whole place feels. The world you've stepped into doesn't separate trade from touch, economy from ecstasy. Here, a cinnamon stick can whisper a seduction. A jar of nutmeg might contain a goodbye. And as you move forward, the roads ahead won't just carry goods. They'll carry longing so intense, it leaves scorch marks on parchment and skin. You don't remember falling asleep, but now you wake to silk rustling in slow motion, the hush of moonlight filtering through a paper screen, and the faintest trace of jasmine clinging to your collar. You're in Chang'an, jewel of the Tang dynasty, where love letters arrive in brushstrokes, and even the moon blushes at what goes on behind embroidered curtains. A breeze slips in from the courtyard, carrying the scent of peach blossoms and something deeper human anticipation. In this city, sex is less about surrender and more about form, rhythm, harmony. The courtesans here don't just lie with you. They perform you, conduct you like music. In these rooms, desire is curated with the same precision as a calligraphy scroll. And you, dear traveler, are wildly underqualified to be here. You sit beside a lacquered table where a woman in a crimson robe pours tea slowly. Her hands are deliberate, practiced. This isn't hospitality, it's foreplay. She tells you about Shi, one of the legendary four beauties of ancient China, whose gaze was said to make fish forget how to swim. Her beauty became a weapon, traded by kingdoms. Historians still argue whether she was a pawn or a spy, but either way, her perfume altered the course of war. That's the power we're dealing with here. Women trained in poetry, music, chess, and yes, intimate technique. The Tang courtesans weren't prostitutes. They were living art installations. And with that comes the erotic blueprint they mastered. The art of the bedchamber, the ancestor to the Kama Sutra's eastern cousin. Hidden in palace archives, these guides weren't just about pleasure. They were imperial policy. A ruler's virility was a matter of state, and his lovers were strategic resources. There's a diagram somewhere, inked by a bureaucrat, that outlines ideal coital rhythms by season. Spring, long and gentle. Winter, brief and frequent. Because nothing says dynastic strength like a well-timed climax under a fur blanket. You follow your host through the courtyard, past glowing lanterns and koi ponds. She mentions an infamous romance between a Tang emperor and his favorite concubine, Yang Gaifei, the woman who bathed in rose water and lychee wine, and wore sandalwood between her thighs. The emperor delayed state meetings for her. Wars were postponed. Entire provinces whispered about her silk shoes, embroidered with clouds. One night, a court eunuch accidentally walked in on them during a particularly acrobatic tryst and promptly retired to the countryside. Officially, it was for health reasons. Unofficially, he never looked a lychee in the eye again. And here's your quirky tidbit. The Chinese elite used bronze mirrors not just for reflection, but to enhance erotic encounters. Polished to a high sheen, these mirrors were placed strategically so partners could admire technique or facial expressions, depending on preference. One particularly risque poem describes lovers watching themselves from 3 angles while eating preserved plums. Because nothing enhances an orgasm like a sour snack in great lighting. Your guide leads you to a low bench where a scroll is unfurled, not of scripture or war, but positions, sequences, theories. She explains the core belief that sexual energy is sacred, cyclical, and transferable. A well-aligned lover could extend your lifespan. A mismatched one? Drain your ki and your will to govern. The emperor's bed was essentially a battery. Charger for the soul. And that's why choosing a consort wasn't about looks alone. It was about energy resonance, rhythm compatibility, even elemental balance. Earth signs with fire signs? A disaster, but water with wood? Now that's where dynasties are born. You're handed a small vial amber glass, wax sealed. Inside, crushed osmanthus petals and musk. It's a replica of a perfume once used by a poetess known only as Moon in her hair. She wrote erotic haikus, smoked opium in moderation, and seduced 3 governors, 2 scholars, and a visiting monk. Her scent? Described as the breath before a kiss. Her love life? A series of sonnets and suspicious fainting spells. She died rich, revered, and possibly laughing. Her final poem reads, "He left, a kept silk, and the plum wine." Historians still debate the line between courtesan and consort in Tang society. Some were deeply respected artists and political influencers. Others vanished when a more fragrant rival arrived. One scroll documents a power struggle between 2 lovers of the same prince, each sending him different perfumes to influence his mood. The poor man walked around in a constant cloud of lavender and sandalwood, unable to think straight. Eventually, he took a vow of celibacy, claiming he could no longer trust his own nose. Back in your room, the scent of that ancient perfume lingers. You lay down on the silk mat, the candle beside you flickering like a lover's breath against your shoulder. Somewhere outside, a lute plays. Not loud, just enough to remind you that in this city, sex wasn't scandal, it was symphony. A slow, precise unraveling. And the Silk Road? It didn't just carry goods. It carried manuals, fantasies, techniques erotic. Data that slipped across borders to tucked inside scrolls, soaked into fabric, whispered across pillows. And with every empire, every bedroom, the melody changed. The ground beneath your sandals shifts again, and this time it's warmer, softer, dustier. You wake in India, where the air smells like roasted cumin, cardamom tea, and the sweat of 1,000 pilgrims. There's a rhythm to it all, a humid pulse that clings to your skin and murmurs low promises into your bones. A temple bell hums in the distance, and a pair of lovers giggle from behind a tapestry. You've entered a land where sex isn't sin, it's structure. And not just structure like rules, structure like architecture. Temples rise here with entire walls carved into stone Kama Sutras, as if love and pleasure are permanent parts of the landscape, unshakable even by time. You run your fingers over the smooth thigh of a sandstone goddess mid-embrace. She doesn't flinch. She's been doing this for 900 years. India didn't flirt with eroticism, it institutionalized it. You pass under a carved arch and find yourself in a quiet garden where a sage sits cross-legged under a mango tree, grinding spices with a stone pestle. He nods at you like he already knows what's on your mind. And maybe he does. He hums, "Union is a dance." That's your first lesson. Then he flicks a pinch of turmeric at a squirrel and tells you the tale of Vatsyayana, the monk who penned the Kama Sutra not as a smut manual, but a philosophical treatise on pleasure, morality, and connection. Historians still argue whether Vatsyayana himself was celibate or just very, very observant. Either way, he recorded more than positions. He recorded moods, preludes, the moment when a lover bites your lower lip not to hurt you, but to remind you they could. Nearby, a group of young students practice tantric breathing beside a sculpture of intertwined deities. This isn't yoga class, this is preparation. In the tradition of Tantrism, sexual union is a spiritual ladder. You climb it breath by breath. Energy is pulled upward through chakras like oil through a wick, and if done properly, you reach a state of samadhi, oneness, release, a full body exhale into the cosmos. At least, that's the idea. And if you're skeptical, that's fine. The guidebook says enlightenment is optional, but recommended. So is coconut oil. You wander deeper into the temple complex and stumble upon a scandal. The story of Amrapali, a royal courtesan so beautiful that entire assemblies were delayed when she entered a room. Born in a mango grove, yes, again with the mangoes, she was trained in classical dance, politics, and seduction. She entertained kings, philosophers, and famously, the Buddha himself. Though their encounter was spiritual, her reputation as an enlightened temptress followed her like sandalwood smoke. Some say she retired into peace and renunciation. Others claim she had a lover for every moon cycle and a secret chamber lined with jasmine petals and leopard skins. Your call which version you believe. Both are intoxicating. Quirky tidbit: ancient Indian texts advised men to use betel nut chews to dye their lips red before seduction. Not lipstick just to chew that. Stained your mouth like you just made out with a berry bush. Attractive? Questionable. But definitely committed. They also recommended aphrodisiacs like spiced milk, ghee with saffron, and even powdered pearls, because apparently nothing gets the heart racing like ingesting crushed gemstones. The ancient Indian bedroom was basically a Michelin star kitchen, with less garlic and more metaphor. As the sun dips low and the temple shadows lengthen, you come upon a pair of dancers rehearsing. Their movements are slow, precise. Every gesture has meaning. One tilts her head, just so, and you feel it in your chest. She's performing Shringara Rasa, the aesthetic flavor of love. Not lust, not romance. That impossible, aching, suspended moment where you almost touch. The Kama Sutra devotes entire chapters to this space between, the stolen glances, the veiled suggestions, the brush of a foot beneath the banquet table. It's all part of the dance. A good lover here wasn't the one who conquered quickly, but the one who could wait, who could hold eye contact across a crowded temple hall and make you forget how to pray. Some historians suggest the Kama Sutra's wide influence is due not just to its content, but to its portability. Small enough to carry, discreet enough to hide. Travelers tucked it into spice chests and sandalwood boxes, bringing it westward along with pepper and ivory. It wasn't just literature, it was luggage. Whispered at Persian courts, quoted in Roman baths, misquoted in Victorian drawing rooms. And yet, here, in its place of origin, it's less a curiosity and more a compass. A way of being. A method for touch that's deliberate, reverent, and occasionally upside down. As night falls, you're invited to recline on a stone bench as rose petals are scattered across your lap. You're offered a drink, warm milk, cardamom heavy, sweetened with honey and silence. The stars above you are ancient. So is the story of lovers finding each other by scent and starlight. You close your eyes. A temple bell chimes once. And somewhere behind your heartbeat, you hear the echo of fingers tracing a name onto someone else's skin, slow, careful, and unforgettable. You wake with pomegranate juice on your lips and a headache made of poetry. The sky above you is ink blue, heavy with stars, and the air smells like roasted pistachios, crushed rose petals, and a hint of jealousy. You're in Persia, now ancient. Shiraz, where words are currency, saffron is seduction, and lovers write sonnets so devastating they make wine feel redundant. You blink and realize you've been reclined beneath a cypress tree beside a private courtyard pool, and there's a scroll in your lap titled The Art of Not Dying from Desire. It's written in perfect calligraphy. No one owns up to writing it, but the garden smells like secrets, and the woman across from you is holding a ripe fig like it's a metaphor for something very private. Spoiler: it is in this part of the Silk Roads, the spice trade meets storytelling head on. You're not just buying cardamom or cinnamon here, you're buying the right to whisper someone's name into the steam of a teacup. Persian love culture was fluent in subtext. A dropped scarf, a misquoted couplet, a glance held too long at a marketplace stall, Everything meant something, especially when nothing was allowed to be said aloud. The ruling dynasties were strict on paper, but behind those paper screens, the erotic tension could choke a tiger. You learn of a forbidden affair that still lingers in the city's oral traditions. A Sufi poet and a merchant's wife, both obsessed with poetry, used shared verses as code. He'd write a line and sell it sewn into the lining of a spice pouch. She'd buy that pouch from the market, add a reply line, and send it back hidden in saffron threads. One time, her husband cooked a lamb stew with the saffron and briefly hallucinated what historians believe may have been erotic couplets read in the voice of Rumi himself. It said he threw out the stew, blamed it on spoiled turmeric, and became inexplicably celibate for the next 7 years. The thing about Persia is that love and beauty weren't hobbies, they were civic duties. You were expected to appreciate both. Even soldiers had favorite poets. And if you didn't recite Hafez at least once during a seduction attempt, you were socially marked as a fraud. But Persian erotic culture wasn't vulgar. It was layered, metaphor-heavy, and deeply seasonal. Pomegranates signaled longing, figs were intimacy. Saffron was passion, but also price, because the best love stories always cost something. Sometimes just your dignity. Sometimes your house. You follow a trail of rosewater and oud through the bazaar, where a perfumer named Soraya tells you the key to desire is tension. She offers you 2 oils, one made of crushed jasmine and vetiver sharp, almost electric. The other is mellow, almost sleepy, with notes of honey and sandalwood. Wear them together, she says, but on different wrists. Let your lover chase the difference. You're halfway through sniffing when a young man rushes in, panicked. His lover has left him for a silk merchant. Soraya barely looks up. He didn't listen, she says. He mixed the oils. Quirky tidbit? Persian gardens were designed with erotic pacing in mind. The narrow paths, the sudden turns, the fountains all engineered to mirror the emotional stages of seduction. You begin with curiosity. You proceed to intoxication. You end up wet and slightly confused beneath a citrus tree. One garden inscription from the Safavid era even suggests placing lavender near seating areas to relax the guest into confession. If your date night ends in tears or ecstasy, blame the landscaping. You reach the garden of a nobleman known only as the Falcon, who once hosted a private banquet attended by spice traders and courtesans disguised as musicians. A lute player spilled sumac into a dish of yogurt and in the process, inspired a spontaneous kiss between 2 rivals. That kiss ignited a trade alliance, a scandal, and eventually, a ballad that became popular for years until it was banned for being too suggestive regarding dairy. Historians still argue whether the Falcon was a political genius or just someone who deeply enjoyed erotic chaos. At night, Shiraz changes. The poems get slower. The spices burn softer. And lovers become silhouettes moving behind silk lanterns. You sit beside a shallow pool, dipping your fingers into the water, watching how your reflection bends. A servant hands you a scroll sealed with wax and clove buds. You break it open. It's a poem. It ends with the line, "Come to me with your palms scented by travel, your eyes full of trade winds, and your heart hollowed by the miles it took to reach me." You don't know who sent it. You just know it's meant for you, and it makes your skin hum. The air tonight is full of things unsaid. There's something haunting about the way these stories linger, not because they were always tragic, but because they were always almost. The lovers almost escaped. The kiss almost happened. The poem was almost signed. And in that almost, the perfume of longing never quite fades. That's what keeps you walking through the garden, even when the path grows darker. Because you're not just chasing stories. You're chasing the scent of someone who once walked this road before you holding a fig. A poem, and the belief that love might just be worth the price of saffron. You wake up sticky with salt and sin, somewhere between a marble column and a half-empty amphora of wine. The sea crashes in the distance, gulls scream like drama queens, and someone nearby is whispering a confession that absolutely isn't meant for public ears. Welcome to the Greco-Roman world, where love is a public spectacle, sex is a form of diplomacy, and olive oil is applied more liberally than state propaganda. You're reclining on a villa rooftop in Corinth, wrapped in a robe that isn't yours, next to a man whose sandals cost more than your last relationship. He smells like cinnamon, crushed bay leaves, and consequence. You don't ask his name. That would ruin the magic. This part of the Silk Roads doesn't feel like a trade route. It feels like a theater. Everything is on display. Your wealth, your affairs, your ability to recite Sappho while lounging half-nude with grapes in your mouth. Greeks adored beauty, but not passively. Beauty was an active pursuit, a civic expectation. The body wasn't just admired, it was staged, sculpted, oiled, displayed like a prize goat at a divine auction. And as Rome absorbed Greek tastes, they added their own spin, scandal. Public baths doubled as gossip hubs, and emperors' love lives were tracked more obsessively than war victories. If it wasn't spicy, it wasn't remembered. Take Emperor Nero, for example, a man who made entire dinner parties out of seduction. He once married a young man named Sporus, had him castrated, and referred to him publicly as his wife. Historians still argue whether Nero was deranged, dramatic, or just deeply committed to confusing his senators. Either way, the silk robes Sporus wore were imported from the East, likely traded for with cloves and cinnamon spices so valuable that Roman law attempted to ban their use in non-elite households. Spoiler, it didn't work. One senator's wife was caught bathing in saffron-infused milk and claimed it was for skin irritation. Records suggest she looked radiant and entirely unrepentant. You walk through a Roman spice market where traders bark out prices in Greek, Latin, and seduction. A merchant waves a vial of Egyptian myrrh under your nose and mutters, "For lovers who forget names but remember scent." You buy too. Not because you need them, but because the salesman has eyelashes like a myth. Down the alley, you pass a tavern wall scribbled with graffiti. It reads, "I made love to Felicia on this spot. Twice. She preferred Marcus." Below that, someone else wrote, "You spelled Felicia wrong." Quirky detail? Roman graffiti is the earliest Yelp review system we have. Especially for brothels, speaking of which Roman brothels were less sleazy and more organized. Each had its own themes, price lists, and regulars. Many featured frescoes above the doors depicting available menu items. One popular option, the cinnamon girl, a nickname for workers who wore a dab of the rare spice behind their ears. It signaled luxury, but also danger, because the scent lingered, and jealous wives had sharp noses and sharper lawyers. One court case even records a senator being outed due to cinnamon on his toga. His defense? "I was near a pie." It did not hold up. You stroll past a villa where a party is in full swing. A host is reading erotic poetry while his guests recline on couches, sipping spiced wine and judging each other silently. Suddenly, the doors burst open and a woman storms in, throwing coriander seeds at a man's face while shouting, "You told me I was your muse." He replies, "You were, until your cousin sent me figs." And just like that, a duel is scheduled for the morning. No swords, just insults and interpretations of Virgil. Because in Rome, love wasn't private. It was performative art. The sensory overload here is part of the allure. Roasting meats laced with nutmeg. Bodies slick with oil. After a bath, the scratch of linen sheets against sunburnt skin. Even the gods got involved. Aphrodite had her own line of perfumes, and temples sometimes sold scented oil in her name, promising fertility, beauty, and at least one memorable night. Pilgrims bought them, hoping to return home with more than a spiritual souvenir. They often did. Infections included. A lover once told you that Romans treated sex like a seasoning, meant to be sprinkled over everything, but never replaced the main dish. You didn't know what that meant until now. You're lying beneath grapevines, someone's tongue tracing the curve of your shoulder, and all you can think about is the way the air tastes. Sweet, sour, and slightly smoky, like cloves left too. Long in the fire, someone starts playing a flute. Someone else laughs too loud. And above it all, a voice recites, "Love conquers all," then adds, "especially after wine and nutmeg." You come to in the middle of a market that smells like temptation, dressed in layers of cumin, ambergris, and dust. The sun is high over Damascus, and the world feels dipped in honey and chaos. You're surrounded by noise merchants shouting, camels spitting, children chasing each other between spice sacks, but somehow it all flows around you like silk. On skin, this isn't just commerce, this is theater. The silk roads pass through here, not like a highway, but like blood through a heart. Everything pulses, color, scent, desire. And at the center of it all is a stall where a woman in indigo robes sells incense, so potent it makes grown men forget their marriages. She calls it asterisk, smoke for secrets. You ask for 2 sticks, just in case that Arabian erotic culture is a game of patience and heat. Unlike the Greco-Roman flash, here seduction is slow, simmered. The right poem whispered at the right moment could shift the balance of an entire marriage or a kingdom. You walk past a tent where a storyteller recites tales from the perfumed garden, a medieval Arabic manual of lovemaking, and the small crowd leans in, eager and bashful. It's not just about technique, it's about presence. One of the chapters is titled, Asterisk, on knowing the moment before the touch. If that doesn't say everything about how this culture feels love, nothing does. The scent of musk guides you toward a tea seller who pauses mid-pour to tell you the tale of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who once disguised himself to wander the markets. At night, seeking distraction, confession, or both. One evening, he heard a courtesan singing in a garden, her voice perfumed with longing. He entered, unannounced, and left 3 hours later without his robe, his poetry scroll, or his sense of emotional safety. Historians still argue whether she was a spy, a sorceress, or just incredibly good with a zither. Either way, he doubled the guards on his harem after that, and had someone invent rose-flavored sherbet to calm his nerves. Priorities. You duck into a spice stall with walls stacked high in pyramids of paprika, turmeric, dried limes, and something that smells suspiciously like apology. The shopkeeper grins, slides you a jar of Trader's Regret, a blend of cinnamon, black seed, and crushed violet petals. For when you've said too much, he says. You tuck it in your bag beside your dignity. Just as you're about to leave, you hear a sharp, whispered argument behind the hanging rugs. A merchant's daughter and her lover, caught mid-flirtation. She throws a pouch of cloves at him and shouts, "My mother warned me about men who smell like imports." A local proverb, apparently and the quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Arabia, ambergris, yes, the whale vomit perfume ingredient, was so prized it was traded for land. Some claimed it cured heartbreak, others used it in love potions. One romantic pessimist famously mixed it into ink and wrote rejection letters that smelled too intoxicating to throw away. Scholars still debate whether this was sweet or deeply manipulative. The debate continues in the comment section of several ancient love poems. At the Great Mosque, you notice pairs of lovers pretending to be scholars, sitting just a bit too close in the shade. It's all unspoken. No one touches. But the air between them is thick with poetry and proximity. You watch a man drop a scroll for a woman to pick up. She opens it, reads a verse, and blushes. You don't know what it says, but from her smile, it's either praise or scandal or both. And you realize something. Here, the most erotic thing you can give someone is attention. Pure, undivided, poetic attention. It's rarer than saffron and twice as addictive. Later, over mint tea, your guide tells you of a scandal that once shook the city. A caliph's favorite concubine fell for a Christian spice trader. Their love letters were hidden in bundles of nutmeg. For months, they exchanged lines from the Rubaiyat, until one night, a letter was intercepted. The traitor disappeared. The concubine was sent to a desert retreat for health reasons. Her last known act? Releasing a handful of saffron into the palace fountain. To this day, it said the water smelled like her heartbreak for 7 days. Night falls, and the market closes slowly, like a lover's eyes after a long kiss. You pass the incense woman again. She offers you one last stick, this one called asterisk, aftertaste. You take it, light it, and feel the smoke wrap around your shoulders like a memory. You realize the Arabian world didn't separate desire from devotion, spice from story. Here, everything is entangled scent, scripture, silk, sign. And as the smoke curls into the night sky, you can't help but wonder whose name still lingers in it, waiting to be whispered again. You awaken to water lapping gently against wood and the distant creak of ropes pulling tight under salt-heavy air. The scent hits you first sharp, peppery, almost arrogant. You're on a Venetian trading ship slicing through the Adriatic, and every inch of this floating palace smells like ambition. Barrels of black pepper, cloves, and nutmeg are stacked below deck like treasure, and in Venice, they might as well be. These spices are currency, weapons, aphrodisiacs, and sometimes apologies. You roll onto your side, blink into the gold-tinged light, and find yourself face to face with a man who's smiling like he owns a scandal. You don't know his name, but his wrists are stained with saffron, and his mouth tastes faintly of deceit and fennel. Welcome to the Republic of Masks. Venice is an erotic paradox stripped in public, wild behind curtains. It's a city of disguises, where sin wears silk and shame is seasonal. You disembark at dawn into a foggy canal-side market, and the streets whisper like a lover's breath, wet, unpredictable, and full of traps. Everyone here wants something. Spices, titles, secrets, flesh. Preferably all three. The spice trade has turned Venice into a theater of taste. Clove is fashionable. Cardamom is scandalous. Cinnamon is practically foreplay. But the real commodity, anonymity. And nothing hides a broken vow like a mask trimmed in gold leaf. You pass a masked courtesan, stepping out of a gondola. Her eyes glimmer through the slits like a cat who's read too much erotic poetry. She waves a handkerchief dabbed with orange blossom oil code for availability and mild heartbreak. She tells you of Veronica Franco, the most famous courtesan of 16th century Venice, who seduced nobles, published her own poetry, and debated morality with bishops between baths. She once claimed that sleeping with a man was like sampling a vintage, sometimes worth the taste, rarely worth the headache. Her scent? A custom blend of rose, clove, and crushed pearl. Historians still argue whether she was liberated or just cleverly confined. Either way, her letters are still studied by scholars and sighed over by romantic cynics. A spice merchant invites you into his palazzo, under the pretense of showing off his new import of Sri Lankan cinnamon bark, but instead, he leads you into a salon of velvet chairs and whispered propositions. Here, contracts are sealed with toasts and sometimes with thighs. You overhear a deal being struck. One chest of nutmeg for access to a Turkish perfume formula. Another merchant interrupts with a joke about saffron stains on silk sheets. No one laughs, but two people blush. You are offered a spoonful of pepper infused honey and a question. How do you taste loyalty? You don't answer. You're too distracted by the way the honey clings to your tongue like a memory. Quirky tidbit? In Venice, masked balls often featured spice challenges, a sensual game where participants blind-tasted spices from exotic lands and guessed their names. The loser had to reveal a secret. The winner got to ask any question. One documented night, a duchess correctly identified 14 spices, asked the ambassador of Spain his darkest desire, and disappeared with him for 3 days. When she returned, she claimed she'd been at confession. No one believed her. Everyone envied her. The spice trade made and unmade reputations here. You hear of a widow who used clove sachets to lure clients into her perfumery turned bordello. Of a cardinal who lost his position after being caught bathing in cinnamon milk with 2 opera singers. Of a pepper magnate who fell in love with a gondolier, left his fortune behind, and opened a bakery known for aphrodisiac pastries. He died broke but famously satisfied. As you follow a trail of crushed aniseed and regret through the city's winding alleys, you're drawn toward the Rialto Bridge, where spies and seducers trade information with equal finesse. A masked figure leans in and tells you this: every shipment of spice that arrives carries more than flavor, it carries whispers. A clove might come laced with a rumor. A bundle of saffron might hide a love letter. And more than once, a sealed spice jar has been opened to reveal a silk ribbon stained with tears, perfume, and promises broken somewhere near Alexandria. That night, you attend a masquerade in a candlelit hall where the floor is scattered with rose petals and peppercorns. The music is too slow, the wine too sweet, the glances too long to be innocent. A woman in a black velvet mask leans in and whispers, "You smell like trouble." You reply, "I smell like cinnamon." She smiles. Exactly. You dance once, twice, maybe more, you lose track. When the clock strikes midnight, everyone removes their masks, except her. She just walks away, leaving behind a silk glove, scented with bergamot and pepper. You press it to your lips and feel the heat of 1,000 miles of trade, lust, and longing. In Venice, spice is seduction, trade is foreplay, and the mask? That's just the invitation. You awaken to a heat so thick it wraps around your chest like a damp, jealous lover. The air tastes of cinnamon and rain, and somewhere nearby, a rooster screams like it's been betrayed. You're deep in the colonial tropics now, Ceylon, the Malabar coast, maybe even the Banda Islands. No one tells you for sure. The maps change with every new conquest. You sit up slowly, sheets clinging to your back, and hear voices outside bartering over nutmeg, clove, and blood. Because here, the spice trade isn't about exotic flavor, it's about power, violence, and lust you can almost bottle. And in these colonies, seduction is sticky, dangerous, and often fatal. You walk through a plantation where cinnamon trees line the dirt path like reluctant witnesses. A laborer scrapes the bark off with a curved knife. Careful not to cut too deep, it's a delicate art. The scent rises, intoxicating and almost floral, but you can't ignore the undercurrent of sweat and something darker. Cinnamon made men rich enough to start wars. It also made them paranoid. And here, among the trees, you hear the story of a Dutch governor who fell for a local dancer. Her performances were laced with meaning, every hand gesture a taunt, every sway of her hips a warning. They say she wore cinnamon bark in her hair and nutmeg oil on her skin. He called her his spice widow. She called him the fourth man to try and own me. Historians still argue whether she truly cursed at his name or just poisoned his. Tea with clove buds and silence. Colonial courts were full of scandal dressed in linen. British officers fell for Tamil wives. Portuguese traders wrote sonnets to Javanese concubines. And in every love story, there was a price: land, loyalty, or life. One tale survives about a cinnamon heiress, half Portuguese, half local, who received 4 proposals in a single week. She rejected them all, vanished into the jungle, and was later seen sailing toward Goa wearing a sari made of Dutch maps. Her shit, they say, smelled of vanilla and rebellion. In the colonial tropics, scent became a weapon. Women burned patchouli under their windows to lure men. Men dabbed cardamom oil behind their ears before meetings that accidentally turned intimate. And perfume recipes were fiercely guarded, handed down like inheritance. You pass a creaky apothecary in a crumbling town square, where a woman in gold bangles offers you a vial labeled Regret No 3. You ask what's inside. She smiles and says, "The reason 2 governors fought a duel at sunrise." You buy. It obviously quirky tidbit. Nutmeg was once believed to cure everything from flatulence to heartbreak. But most dangerously, it was rumored to induce visions. So colonizers began taking it in absurd quantities, hoping for spiritual insight, or at least something interesting to write home about. One Dutch captain took so much he proposed marriage to his own shadow and tried to sign a trade treaty with a mango tree. The tree, reportedly, declined. At night, you're invited to a feast hosted by a retired cinnamon baron with too many teeth and too few regrets. His table overflows with roasted meats rubbed with clove and chili, tamarind-soaked fruits, and wine laced with mace. The air is thick with gossip. Someone mentions a missionary who vanished after falling in love with a local priestess. Another recounts a widow who inherited a pepper plantation and used her spices to seduce 5 suitors into bankruptcy. Her nickname? The Seasoned Widow. You make a note never to underestimate women with nutmeg grinders. Later, as drums echo through the humid air, you dance with a stranger who smells like tobacco and betrayal. He tells you he once smuggled cinnamon under his lover's skirt to avoid taxes. You laugh. He doesn't. "They caught us," he says. "But they didn't separate us. They married us. Forced us to run the plantation together." You ask if it worked out. He pauses. "Sometimes when it rained." You step outside into the night, the rain finally coming down in heavy sheets. It soaks the earth, draws steam from the soil, and intensifies every scent until the world feels too alive, too intimate. You breathe it in: cinnamon, clove, wet leaves, distant danger. And you realize something. The spice trade wasn't just a network of goods. It was a network of glances, of trysts, of secrets sewn into shipping manifests and love letters disguised as invoices. Lovers crossed oceans. Empires burned. All for the taste of something that lingered longer than it should have. And now, as the final candle flickers beside your bed, the story slows. The spices settle. The air cools. You lay back, the ghost of saffron still on your tongue, and let the echo of distant footsteps fade. Because sometimes the most intoxicating thing in history is knowing you can still smell it. End of script. Sweet dreams.